Thanks for being here. In 1917, the San Francisco-based artist Maynard Dixon accepted an offer from the Great Northern Railway to produce paintings representing Glacier National Park and the surrounding northern Montana terrain for the park's lodges and chalets, along with posters for the railroad's See America First promotional campaign geared toward tourists and travelers. By the time Lewis Hill, president of the Great Northern, approached Dixon for this assignment, the artist had already achieved acclaim for his illustrations of the American West that emphasized the grandeur of its landscapes and the variety of its indigenous peoples. Romantic subjects gaining in popularity in the period of his training at the California School of Design, now known as the San Francisco Art Institute, in the 1890s. Alongside his 7-year-old daughter, Constance, Dixon embarked in August 1917 on a 2-month backpacking trip through Rocky Mountain lakes and peaks, traveling outside the park boundaries and into the prairies to end his journey with a visit to the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. This trip resulted in 12 canvases for the Great Northern, 8 landscapes, and 4 Blackfeet figural subjects ranging in size from 36 by 40 inches to 20 by 30 inches, all inspired by numerous oil sketches, drawings, and personal photographs snapped with a Kodak. Unfortunately, only 3 of the originally commissioned paintings are locatable today. Shower at Red Eagle Lake, housed in the art collection of the Great Northern Railway's successor, the Burlington Northern, Santa Fe, and Fort Worth, Texas, and Northern Forest and their autobiography, which isn't shown, each in private collections, with the latter unavailable to view. Puzzlingly, no evidence for the arrival of these paintings to Glacier exists, due in part to the United States Railroad Administration pausing the See America First publicity campaign during World War I and a resulting slide in tourist numbers. According to art historian Donald Haggerty, Dixon forged at least 24 more canvases of Glacier Park subjects through the early 1920s, several of which he entered in the 1917 Bohemian Club exhibition, the 1918 San Francisco Art Association exhibition, and the Macbeth Galleries in New York City during the 1920s. Until his death in 1946, Dixon would continue drawing upon this wellspring of experiences while working at his studios in San Francisco, Mount Carmel, Utah, and Tucson, Arizona. While art historical scholarship has recounted the chronology of Dixon's 1917 Glacier National Park trip, including his encounters with famed Montana artist Charles Russell and several Blackfeet individuals, remaining unexamined in Dixon's images is the historical context dating to the 19th century of Blackfeet dislocation from these cosmologically sacred territories. Similarly, the robust historical and social scientific historiography on Glacier National Park and this controversial Blackfeet removal also lacks an art historical perspective of this disruptive era to indigenous lifeways. When studied through the lens of Blackfeet dislocation, Dixon's Glacier National Park paintings and drawings take on new and powerful resonance. These are topographically accurate pictures of locations that Blackfeet peoples frequented seasonally and that remain essential to their origins, identity, sovereignty, knowledge, sustenance, shelter, and ceremony. While their aesthetic beauty masks the ways they evoke historical dispossession of this particular terrain for the Blackfeet, Dixon's images demonstrate the national park boundaries are productive spaces for decolonizing analyses of the ideological collisions that exist between Euro-American and indigenous, U.S. governmental and tribal land philosophies that so many national park borders embody. For thousands of years, the Blackfeet of present-day North America, known in their language as the Anskapi Pukuni, inhabited territory extending from the Saskatchewan River in the north to the Missouri River in the south. The 1855 Lame-Bold Treaty first drew boundary lines along their lands, delineating a reservation that spanned the Continental Divide to the mouth of the Milk River in Montana, and from the Canadian border northward to the Muscle Shell River. This treaty promised ration deliveries, but the U.S. federal government largely failed to distribute supplies. These circumstances, paired with diseases, severe weather, and severely reduced bison populations by 1883, led to several starvation winters and deaths of more than a quarter of reservation Blackfeet. Desperate, the Montana Blackfeet sold 800,000 acres of mountainous terrain on the west end of the reservation in 1895 to the U.S. government for $1.5 million. Acknowledged historically as the ceded strip, these lands became the eastern half of Montana's Glacier National Park upon its founding in 1910 and formed a 100-mile shared border with the Blackfeet Reservation that is still present today. This boundary, as historian Philip Burnham characterized, is, quote, historically contentious, unfenced, and invisible. Thus, it is difficult to trace its complexities with the naked eye. Although the 1895 sale had guaranteed the Blackfeet access to the ceded strip, the Glacier National Park Act of 1910 reversed that promise, subjecting the Blackfeet to federal laws prohibiting fishing, hunting, grazing, and timber cutting in what had been tribal territory. Moreover, the 1910 Park Act extinguished all Blackfeet claims to the mountains on the western boundary of the reservation, even as it permitted the presence of non-native white landowners. Thinking they had only temporarily leased their lands to the U.S. government, the Blackfeet had unwittingly lost access to several practical needs available only in the foothills and highlands. These include foodstuffs, herbs, and medicinal plants, mountainous shelter from harsh winter winds, and game meat supplementary to the regular bison diet. In addition to delivering bountiful deer, elk, beaver, sheep, goats, and moose for food and clothing, mountainous regions also provided plentiful fish, invaluable resources following bison extermination in the 1880s. Not only a practical resource, but a spiritual realm for the Blackfeet, the looming snow-capped Rocky Mountains and foothills represented in Dixon's works are symbolically loaded with Blackfeet cosmology. Deities, spirits, and teachers, including bears, eagles, and ravens, reside in their caves and crags. Prior to settler incursion, Blackfeet would capture such animals during migration patterns to obtain ceremonial items. They also derived ritual materials like incense from sugar pine located in the high country. Quarrying stones for pipe making, too, was best accomplished at this higher altitude. Prior to 1910, the Blackfeet would seasonally navigate numerous thoroughfares, passes, and pathways through the foothills, valleys, and mountains to obtain these materials of spiritual and physical sustenance. For instance, Blackfeet elders would coordinate communal movement toward winter grounds in the valleys and edges of the mountains at the end of summer season. Today, the Blackfeet still argue that they should possess rights for sustenance and raw materials in Glacier National Park despite federal restrictions. Dixon was likely unaware of the importance of Glacier National Park terrain to the Blackfeet when he and his daughter arrived at Glacier National Park in 1917, but he would gradually learn of this land's import through interactions, starting with his trail mates. Frank Hoffman, New York artist and friend of Dixon, was simultaneously working for the Great Northern on Glacier Park promotional illustrations and agreed to serve as guide alongside trail expert Chick Grimsley, who worked for the Park Saddle Horse Company, and a cook affectionately named Jailhouse John. Their trek began at the St. Mary's eastern entrance, leading through Red Eagle Pass and down into the valley of Red Eagle Lake. In a letter written to Charles Lummis while camped at Red Eagle Lake, Dixon opined about the surrounding wildlife and vegetation in his impending travels, quote, further to the foot of some glaciers, red granite peaks, and alpine meadows, end quote. This correspondence is significant, as Lummis was an important American journalist, preservationist, photographer, and ethnographer of Southwestern Native peoples who held anti-assimilationist stances and founded the Southwest Museum of the American Indian in Los Angeles, which merged with the Autry Museum of the American West in 2003, providing it with a great number of Native American artworks and artifacts. Shower on Red Eagle Lake from 1917, one of Dixon's 3 surviving oils for the Great Northern, resulted from this stage of his trip. The magnitude and monumentality of Dixon's scene, which romantically portrays shifting weather and light across the canvas, along with the dominating mass of mountains behind Red Eagle Lake, exemplify an act of artistic colonization dating to 18th century American landscape painting, but flourishing in 19th century Hudson River School works, especially the later bombastic variety of Albert Bierstadt, Frederick Church, and Thomas Moran, that scholars such as John Sears have investigated for their evocations of American iconicity and sacredness in the age of armchair and railroad tourism. Following Blackfeet dislocation under federal coercion, Dixon visually co-opted a Blackfeet site, transforming Red Eagle Lake into a new, different, and uniquely American place through his choices of scale and title that, on behalf of the Great Northern Railway, christened Red Eagle Lake a national park landmark, a distinct settler colonial location. The specific Glacier Park locales Dixon depicted in other images, likewise, hold long-standing sacred status among the Blackfeet. These pictures, therefore, epitomize an ideology ubiquitous in the American landscape painting tradition of non-native settler artists rhetorically claiming revered sites that natives had already established as reverential within their cultures. In this way, Dixon's landscape should be interpreted for the ways they reveal competing claims to sacred iconic status and cultural heritage internationally, in this case between the U.S. federal government and the Blackfeet Nation. From Red Eagle Lake, Dixon and company traveled past St. Mary's Lake, a place where Blackfeet traditionally located buffalo and bighorn sheep along its elevated grassy slopes in the winter and procured materials for sacred bundles. From here, Dixon would have viewed Split Mountain and Red Eagle Mountain, both eponymous titles of 2 missing paintings that Dixon crafted for the Great Northern Railway. Importantly, Blackfeet would travel upslope on Red Eagle Mountain and drive sheep downward to the frozen surface of St. Mary's Lake. Although one can only imagine the aesthetics of these canvases, Dixon's existing 1917 paintings, The Snow Patch and Mountain and Meadow, Glacier National Park, Montana, can help us see possible resemblances. The next park landmark that Dixon passed was Going to the Sun Mountain, just north of St. Mary's Lake. The fur trader, Blackfeet historian and friend of Dixon, James Willard Schultz, named the peak in 1888 while hunting in the region. But its Blackfeet name is the Face of Sour Spirit, who went back to the sun after his work was done mountain. A location for vision quests, this mountain in the Blackfeet origin story is where Napi, also known as the Old Man, returned home to the sun after creating the rocks, forests, rivers, mountains, prairies, and peoples and teaching them how to care for themselves. Dixon then explored around Piegan Mountain and through Piegan Pass. Via Logan Pass, Dixon's group arrived in September to Charles Russell's Bullhead Lodge, a summer home and studio located at the southern edge of the 10-mile-long Lake McDonald. Prior to departing on the Glacier Park trip, Dixon had written to Russell from San Francisco requesting to visit his cabin. Russell obliged, reiterating that there were no Indians there, but plenty of picturesque country to paint, and that they could rendezvous at the foot of Lake McDonald. Russell's assertion that Indians did not frequent his property is ironic, since he frequently painted them in nearby settings, and demonstrates the extent of indigenous dislocation by 1917, as Blackfeet, Kootenai, and other area tribes traditionally hunted mule deer, fished for trout and whitefish, and scavenged mallard eggs along Lake McDonald. From Russell's lodge, Dixon departed for the final leg of his journey, the Blackfeet Indian Reservation in Browning. En route, he passed through the Two Medicine area, which he recounted in a poem implying that he witnessed Two Medicine Lake in his reminiscences about yellow cottonwood groves and willows, quote, silently waiting where swiftly Two Medicine Stream comes down from the mountains, end quote. The regional plants that Dixon noted are vital to traditional Blackfeet sustenance. Cottonwood, which Dixon depicted in the background of Sign Talk, was utilized for firewood and shelter during winter camps, horse feed, smoking mixtures, and most importantly, for the center pole in the Sundance ceremony. Willow was employed as painkillers and fever reducers, frameworks for sweat lodges, ceremonial sticks, dyes, backrests, as we see here, teepee pegs and pins, and also lodge poles. Dixon's group exited the park through East Glacier and camped among Blackfeet families on the North Fork of Cutbank Creek, a juncture between the mountains and prairies. Information in a letter from William R. Mills, the advertising agent for the Great Northern Railway, helped Dixon locate Blackfeet contacts. Chief Owen Heavybreast acted as an interpreter, while Chief Two Guns Whitecalf, Chief Medicine Owl, Chief Curly Bear, and Chief Lazy Boy were among Dixon's Blackfeet acquaintances and models at several encampments over his month's stay. These tribal members invited Dixon to scalp and grass dances, initiations of the Brave Dog Society, and a beaver medicine ceremony. With the first snowfall in October, Dixon and his daughter Constance departed for San Francisco, never to return to Montana. The majority of Glacier Park and Blackfeet compositions Dixon completed from his studios thereafter are scenes of reservation encampments. Evening on the Blackfeet Reservation, as we see here, is particularly interesting for its subtle background mountainscape depicted in soft, muted atmospheric perspective and visible only under close scrutinization. This horizontal row of Lewis Range peaks spans the horizon and suggests the presence of actual physical distance between the plains encampment of the Blackfeet and the Rocky Mountains, their former seasonal home prior to settler incursion. Verses that Dixon published in his 1923 volume, Poems and Seven Drawings, reveal his keen awareness of spatial recession between Blackfeet prairie encampments and the mountains. An excerpt from The Plains reads, "Dim in the grass leads the shadowy track of the Blackfeet. Far are their camps. They are lost along the blue wave of the mountains. Dim are their smokes, receding, fading, a phantom, a ghost song. Memory smokes, receding, dissolving over the prairies." Another poem titled Sweat Lodge further indicates Dixon's observations of distinctive colors and shapes inherent to the hills and mountains he viewed while visiting Blackfeet encampments. It reads, "Blue, ethereal blue. Here where the prairie ends, the sky begins, and no less than there on the ultimate peaks of the mountains. Naked and clean to the sky, the little hills rest along the dark base of the ranges, sky-biting teeth set deep in the blue." In contrast to evening on the Blackfeet reservations, teepees at sunset, located on the bottom right of the screen, clearly delineates the Rocky Mountains through contour lines and subtle hues, shadows, and shading. Distinctive among Dixon's encampment pictures is Prairie Evening, which omits mountains and highlights the undulating vastness of Blackfeet plains. Other Dixon paintings, such as A Frosty Morning, Blackfoot Camp, Montana, and Blackfeet Camp in Winter, imagine a wintry reservation that Dixon, who left Montana in October, never witnessed firsthand. Interestingly, a reoccurring motif in all these encampment images is the teepee frame in progress. Its triangular geometry and transparency serve dually as artistic signature and reminder of seasonal itineracy between plains and mountains before federal incursion and the establishment of Glacier National Park. Another group of Dixon's encampment paintings display figural subjects. Old Many Guns, a full-length portrait sketch of a Blackfeet elder, and Young Blackfeet Woman with Papoose suggest background foothills through bold, quick brushwork. For Little Sister, Dixon staged the unnamed girl from these photographs in a tightly cropped composition bounded by foothills. But perhaps the most thought-provoking figural scene is Blackfeet Historians, which appears possibly to represent a mountainous pattern along the bottom border of the teepee's interior. This was likely the same setting that inspired Dixon's conversation and picture writing, in which Blackfeet peoples visually record tribal histories on hide and recount stories orally that detail their cultural origins in the mountains of what became Glacier National Park. Finally, Home of the Half-Breed from 1920 and Home of the Blackfeet from 1938 offer intriguing commentary on indigenous domesticity in Dixon's era. Historian Dan Flores calls Home of the Blackfeet, located on the bottom right of the screen, a work of, quote, anti-nostalgic honesty, end quote. Rather than situating Native figures in a pre-Civil War or even a pre-contact past that alludes to the myth of the vanishing Indian, Dixon's picture instead, Flores argues, quote, evokes the reality of a 20th century world for the Blackfeet for all Westerners, who with the Old West gone still found themselves living in the West, after all, but a modern version, end quote. This particular vision starkly contrasts the gently rolling plains in hues of green and yellow with complementary blues above, deeper in the mountain range with foothills, while softer in the sky. A similar subject, but with foregrounded figure, dwellings, and mountainscape, is Home of the Half-Breed. Here, even more readily visible, is the juxtaposition of two homes, Euro-American settler cabin and ancestral indigenous teepee. The itinerant seasonal movement from prairies to mountains no longer possible, the Blackfeet constructed log cabins for safe refuge from harsh winter conditions that they once found inside the crags and caves of what is now Glacier National Park. Although conceived almost 20 years apart, these two Dixon paintings offer visual evidence of the forced adoption by Blackfeet of the Euro-American values of rooted permanence in and ownership of place. This paper has contextualized Dixon's paintings and drawings of Glacier National Park landscapes and Blackfeet subjects in ways that draw upon developing research for my dissertation currently titled Contested Lands, Indigenous Displacement in Early 20th Century American and Native American Art, which transculturally and through various media studies Euro-American and Native American portrayals of lands claimed by both indigenous communities and federal and state agencies, considering them within historical, political, social, and aesthetic contexts that pivot the locus of attention away from Euro-American attitudes and toward indigenous sensibilities regarding land, space, and place. Along with Dixon's views, works by contemporaneous Glacier National Park photographers such as Helen Post, Fred Kaiser, Walter McClintock, and Edward Curtis, as well as painters Joseph Henry Sharp, Charles Russell, Edwin Deming, Winold Reese, John Ferry, Julius Seiler, Elsa Gemney, and others, are fruitful case studies for further investigations of indigenous dislocations from cosmologically important lands that continue today, for implications of place and conflicting cultural perspectives in early 20th century America, for decolonizing interpretations of Western American landscape painting, and finally, for better understandings of the intersections between Euro-American and Native American history. Thank you.